Hi, I'm Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. I want to thank you for tuning in today to this conversation. We're going to be talking about mobile crisis, deconstructing mobile crisis units. Anyone who's interested in behavioral health for boys and men of color should be interested in this topic. So I know you're going to learn a lot, and I appreciate you for leaning in on this one. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, Blue Shield of California's BlueSky initiative. They made this conversation possible. This conversation is a part of Brother Be Well's Trauma and Healing series. So thanks to Blue Shield of California. Let me introduce to you a dream team, a trio of folks that's going to help us deconstruct this topic. First of all, Ray Harrington is a mentor with the Hawk Institute. Ray Harrington is also a friend of mine. Ray Harrington is also a fellow brother from Detroit. What's up, Ray? I always look forward to times I can get to talk to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ray Harrington, senior. I currently am a mentor for the Hawk Institute. I'm a prior law enforcement. I'm a retired associate warden with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And I also mentor men transitioning back into the community. So I continue to mentor those youth and men out in the community. Thank you, Michael.
Really great. I know you've had a busy day, Ray, so I appreciate you making a little time this evening to talk to us. Thanks a lot. Next up, I want to introduce you to Alondra Thompson. Alondra is a health program manager with Sacramento County. How are you doing, Alondra?
Hi, Michael. I just want to thank you for having me here this evening. I'm glad to participate.
And third up, Dr. Carlos Martinez. He's an associate marriage and family therapist with HearYou.org. Much of the work we do at Brother Be Well wouldn't be possible without Dr. Carlos and many of his colleagues with HearYou.org. You've seen his face and heard his voice on a number of productions. We're always happy to have you back, Dr. C.
Thank you. Glad to be back. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone.
Dr. Carlos, as long as you have the mic and the floor, why don't you get us started? Tell us about mobile crisis units. What are they, and why is it important for an organization like Brother Be Well to be talking about mobile crisis units?
Yeah, no, of course. Mobile crisis units are basically what it says. It's, they're mobile. They're units who respond to crisis, and they're mobile, so they can go different places. So generally speaking, the mobile crisis teams, they can be made up of either generally two clinicians, or it could be a clinician and a police officer. And they can respond to, they can be called out due to a 911 radio call, and they can go to homes, they can go to public places, and they'll do assessments for mental health crisis and determine what needs to be done.
And I would think, Dr. C, don't let me put words in your mouth, but as a current police officer, as well as a mental health clinician, you probably are intimately familiar with how mobile crisis units work.
Yeah, 19 years, roughly about 19 years in my full-time career as a law enforcement officer, and then I off duty as with the mental health as a mental health therapist. And of that 19 years, the last 12 years had been working with crisis response with my police department. So yeah, I guess you can say it's my bread and butter.
Yeah. You probably work with people like Alondra Thompson. So Alondra, let me pull you into this conversation. Tell us a little bit about the unit that you run with Sacramento County. I'm curious about the hours of operation for that particular service. But I'm also wondering, and I think I got this right, I'm not sure. I know there's a Mental Health Services Act, and I just checked my notes to make sure I got that right. I'm wondering about funding for our local mobile crisis unit, if it's through the Mental Health Services Act or not.
So it's not through the Mental Health Services Act. It's actually funded by the county itself. The Board of Supervisors had a lot of comments coming out of community that really said we want to get an alternative to 911 to support us when we're dealing with both mental health and substance use situations. And so Sacramento County funded our currently named Community Wellness Response Team. That consists of a mental health clinician along with a peer with lived experience. We get our calls through 988. And we could talk a little bit more about 988 if you like, but that's how we got started.
Really appreciate that. We've got a whole podcast on brotherbewell.com about that 988 service, the rebranding of that. So really appreciate you setting us straight on where the funding comes from. And I think what's most important there, and we'll talk about this a little bit, Alondra, the mobile crisis unit here locally and probably all over the country, they're publicly funded. So individuals in the community don't need to feel reticent at all about calling because in a sense, we've already paid for that service. Is that too much of a stretch?
That is correct. There is no funding or requirement for services. When we go out there to de-escalate a crisis, we are paid for by the county.
Yeah, that's really great to hear.
We see both Medi-Cal, non-Medi-Cal. We see anyone that calls 988. needing our
Really,
support.
that's really great to hear. Thank you for sharing that perspective with us. I'm going to throw a question now to you, Ray. You're a former police officer and you do a lot of mentoring in the community. We'll talk about your work with youth in just a couple of minutes. But I want to ask you a question. It's kind of the elephant in the room. It's impossible to talk about mobile crisis units and not at least acknowledge that there has been a history, an unfortunate history of negative interactions between law enforcement and communities of color. We could have a whole conversation on the nature of that. That's not what we're here for today. But let's just talk about a little bit why there's apprehension from your perspective in communities of color to engage with mobile crisis, even though, as Alondra just pointed out, these are publicly funded services. So for those of us who are working, we're paying taxes. This is a service that we shouldn't feel reticent about engaging with. But because of some of that history, it can be a stumbling block. Can you kind of take that ball and run with it for a second?
I can. And unfortunately, it's because of a history of disparate treatment with law enforcement in the African American community. And so historically, we just feed off of that. And I can remember as a kid, we used to play a game. It's the cops, and you would just take off and run and scatter. And that was just as a youth. And so I think that behavior has continued on and on and on. And what it's going to take to help is community policing, getting to know who your police officers are. And police are going to just have to, how do I say, kind of bury their pride and be willing to be talked about, be willing to be criticized, be willing to take all of those things in order to gain the trust of the community again. Because it's not, unfortunately, we like things to happen overnight. And it's going to take a lot of time for that to happen. And so when I say we're going to have to take a lot of criticism, I really mean that. It's going to take criticism and again, gaining the trust, because oftentimes until people know that you want to love on them, regardless of what they're going through and their family situations, they're not going to trust you. And I can just share a personal story. Being in law enforcement, you're viewed as an enforcer. You enforce the law. So I retire from law enforcement, and now I get hired back as a consulting, helping guys to re-enter back into the community. So lots of the guys that I had to reach out and shake their hand and help, they saw me as the person that was enforcing the law. They didn't see me as someone that was going to help them and love on them. So that took several months for me to gain their respect and their understanding. But what I did was love on them regardless of how they felt about me, regardless of how they talked about me. And finally, one day it was just, I couldn't do any wrong. Anytime I try to help or reach out to them to share some personal struggles that you had of your own, until they get to know you, until they get to see that you have the same similar struggles or had the same similar struggles, same environment, then that's how you gain their trust.
Really, really appreciate hearing that perspective, Ray. And Dr. C, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I want to ask you how that resonated with you a little bit to hear Ray say police officers are going to have to put their pride down. I'm paraphrasing, Ray. I'm not going to get the words.
Mike, I didn't prepare for this question. Hold on, I didn't prepare for this question.
Well, dude, you were here because you're an expert. You're the expert, Dr. C.
No,
so how did it feel?
It hits close to home. Seriously, I mean, as humans, we don't want to be told that we don't want to admit that we're wrong, right? Or that we did something wrong. And Carlos, the therapist, Carlos, the police officer, Carlos, the dad, Carlos, the husband, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times I need to realize I'm a person first. All these other titles are after. But I also have to remember that I have to swallow my pride, in a sense, admit that I'm wrong, admit that I do have biases, judgments, and I have to open myself up to being vulnerable and have conversations where I'm seeking to understand with the people I work with, whether it's a cop, a client, an issue I have at home with my wife, or an issue I have with my kids, seeking to understand, being open, getting rid of that pride. But that's tough because I'm a person first.
Yeah.
But it's all conversations across all spectrums.
And I don't think, so much of the work that you do when you're out on the street, Dr. C, is tough work. So that's just yet another tough thing that you've got to do. I appreciate you being vulnerable enough to just talk about some of the struggles there. I think hearing those two perspectives from you guys is going to help a lot of people like me who might be a little reticent about engaging with mobile crisis. And so hearing from you two with regard to that, I think is pretty powerful.
You have to be vulnerable.
Yeah, it's critical. And we talk about vulnerability a lot here at Brother Be Well, but never more so than when someone is telling you there's a history of negative interactions. And I love the way you put it too, Ray. You just loved on them. You just, no matter what they thought of you, no matter what they said about you, you just kept loving on them and loving on them. And then eventually they couldn't do without you. They realized you were part of the community too. And then they started to engage. So I really love that. Take a look at a video next just for a few minutes. As we know, crisis, trauma occur in communities all across the board. Every socioeconomic community, every racial community experiences trauma, and often there's a need to engage mental health clinicians, but certainly even mobile crisis units. But sometimes, as we all know, the person that needs intervention doesn't want you to make that call. They don't want to engage. They don't want to check in with law enforcement. They don't want to talk to a mental health clinician. And so this is a video that's going to begin a piece of a conversation that we're going to have. What do you do when the person that's in crisis doesn't want you to make that call? Let's take a look at the video, and then we'll come back together and talk about it a little bit.
Hi, everyone. So today I want to talk to you a little bit more about what to do when a loved one is unwilling to seek help for a mental health problem. So sometimes people who are experiencing mental health problems can be unwilling to seek help. And this can be really difficult for family members or friends who are seeing them struggling with their mental health problem and seeing that they're unwilling to accept the help that you're trying to give them. And I know that that can be a really difficult situation to be in. There are a couple of reasons, however, why someone may be unwilling to accept help. So those can include that they don't recognize or believe that they have a mental health problem, or they may believe that they are capable of handling it on their own. They may also be fearful of the mental health system, or they may be fearful of stigma that may fall upon them if they have a mental health diagnosis. They could also just be in a place where they're just apathetic to getting help and they just don't want to accept the help because they feel their situation is hopeless, or there's just a general sense of apathy around their situation. I think the most important thing that I want to convey, though, within this video is that you can't force someone to accept help. So even if you have the best of intentions and are trying your best to help them access support and help, you can't force someone to receive this kind of help. They need to want to access it on their own. So some tips on what to do within this really difficult situation would be to just start off with making sure that you're opening up the conversation with your loved one. So letting them know your concerns and why you're concerned about them, and really making sure to use I statements rather than you statements. Because you don't want to be attaching blame or anything. You just want to be making sure that you are voicing your concerns and that you are coming at it from as unthreatening a position as possible. So really focusing on why you are concerned rather than saying something along the lines of, you are exhibiting this. Say, I am concerned that I'm noticing that you are doing this, or using I statements. And really making sure that you're keeping the conversation open with them. So making sure that you're keeping the conversation open about the difficulties that they're experiencing or about the symptoms that are coming up, and just making sure you're keeping that dialogue really open with them. Also making sure that they know that you're a really safe person to come to when they do want to access help or when they do want to access supports, and that you'll be there to help support them through that. It can be helpful too to let them know what exactly you mean by getting help or getting supports. So this can be either making a therapy appointment or going to see your doctor or going to see a psychiatrist or even checking into a treatment facility or a hospital. Just making sure it's clear what you mean by accessing supports or help. I think if you are able to do all of these, that would be really helpful, but it's also really important to not hold yourself responsible for them accessing help or extra supports. Again, like I said earlier, you can't force someone to access these supports or this help. So really making sure that you're not putting it all on yourself and really holding yourself accountable for the other person that you're trying to help accessing supports. Also, don't take it personally if they don't want to accept your help. They may be going through different things that they aren't communicating with you. They may be hesitant to accept this help for the various reasons that I outlined at the beginning of the video, but just don't take it personally if they're not willing to accept your help right off the bat. In terms of taking care of yourself and whatnot, it is also really important to access supports for yourself and for your family or loved ones who are also trying to help your loved one access support. So it's really important to take care of yourself and to make sure that you are supporting yourself as best as possible through this difficult situation as well. You may find different things helpful, such as attending therapy yourself or seeking out different support groups for people who are supporting people experiencing mental health problems, or just the basics of taking care of yourself. So self-care basics. So making sure you're getting enough sleep and taking care of your nutrition and taking care of your physical activity and just all those kinds of things to make sure you're taking care of yourself as best as possible in order to best support your loved one. I'm also going to provide a few tips on what to do if a crisis situation arises. So it's really important to familiarize yourself with the Mental Health Act or the equivalent in your region, and to just kind of know what you can do under this Mental Health Act or under the law in your region around a crisis situation and what to do if a crisis situation arises. So some crisis resources that a crisis plan would include the contact information for the nearest hospital, crisis lines, the nearest police department, a treatment provider, a childcare provider if relevant or required, and just a list of supportive family members and friends. If there are immediate concerns for your loved one's safety, make sure to take them to the nearest emergency room as quickly as possible if it is safe to do so. If they are unwilling to go, make sure you call 911 and just kind of make sure that the 911 operator knows that it's a mental health emergency, just in case there is a mental health crisis response team available to come and assess the situation and help support your loved one. In terms of getting your loved one into treatment, they're protected under the law, basically, to be able to decide for themselves if they want to access treatment. And it's usually more effective anyway if they're wanting to access that treatment. Here in Canada, there are several options for getting a loved one into treatment against their will, but again, it's really recommended to work with them in terms of getting them into treatment.
Really a great video, I think. It's important that we garner the support of the person that's in need of treatment there.
Yeah.
And Dr. C, I want to throw this to you for a second, but I've got to say, my big takeaway there in that video was using I statements. And
yes.
I tend to be wired to not do that. So instead of saying you are doing this or you are exhibiting this behavior, learn to say, I am worried. I am scared. I have perceived this. Can you talk about that aspect a little bit, and then all the other things that maybe we need to be thinking about when we're dealing with one that doesn't want to engage with services?
No, sure, of course, right? Carlos the therapist, Carlos the person, Carlos the husband, the dad, right? I'm guilty. I'm guilty almost every day of sitting here using you statements. You did this. You made me feel this way, whatever the case may be. And I have to consciously make an effort to say, hold on for a second. I feel this way because of this. I feel this way because of this. I'm worried. Those go a lot further, and it shifts the concern, not just the accusatory you statements, as I call them, right? Because we don't want to be attacked. We don't want to feel called out. Going back to the video, though, if you're okay with that, it would be great to have someone walk themselves into a hospital. It would be great to have someone walk themselves into mental health urgent care. But unfortunately, like what was said in the video, is a lot of times when someone's in crisis, they don't know they're in crisis, or other reasons. As when I was working in the field, working and responding to radio calls where someone was having a psychotic episode, those were the toughest, because nothing's wrong. I'm the enemy. The government's after them. The family's after them. People are trying to poison themselves. And it's like, okay, they're not going to go anywhere because they think everyone's after them. So why not sit here and isolate yourself? Why not sit here and fight? Because mentally they believe what they believe is real, and nothing we can do will convince them otherwise. So, but Carlos, a police officer, there are things that families can do to essentially force someone to go get help. But that comes with its own share of issues, right? Because, like I mentioned earlier, 911. With my agency that I work for, my co-response unit, which is an officer and a clinician, we didn't respond first, but now we respond with the uniformed police officers. But uniformed police officers are responding to a location, they're armed, the situation is chaotic and crazy. A lot of things can happen, right? And it's going from a 911 dispatcher to the officer, to the family, to the dispatcher, to the officer. It's like a telephone game. A lot of things can get lost in translation there. But for the families who are listening, who are watching, a couple of things to remember. If someone is in crisis, and Alondra, right, help me out with this one as well too. 5150 Welfare Institution Code. 5150 is an application that's a police officer or a clinician who's been designated by the county. It's LPS. I'll nerd out if I go. I'm not gonna nerd out on that one, right? But certain clinicians, not as a Carlos the therapist, I can't complete one of these applications because I'm not designated. Carlos the police officer, I can. So as a police officer, I'll assess the situation. I'll look and see if there is probable cause for me to complete the application. I'm looking to see if someone is a danger to themselves, danger to others, or they're greatly disabled due to a suspected mental illness. And I use suspected because they may never have a diagnosis, right? And once again, I'm not going to nerd out on a lot of the stuff, but if I can take those behaviors and I can articulate them, I can complete the application. And I can involuntarily take that person for up to a 72-hour hold to a hospital or mental health urgent care. But there's also issues with that. People who are mentally ill aren't stupid. They know when the cops are being called. They know where they may go. So they can keep their stuff together just long enough to get through the assessment. And I've realized if I spend enough time with someone, they start to decompensate. I mean, it's just like me, when I'm having a existential crisis about all the stuff I have going on in any given week, any given day, I keep my composure long enough, but as the day goes on, I start to unravel. I'm like, I'm done. So there's also a couple other, for the family to educate themselves on the laws, like the video said, 5150E WIC and 5150.05 WIC. That gives me the application writer. It tells me basically I have to look at third-party credible information, also historical information as well too, to make the best decision to complete that application. So those are things that are on the books now that weren't on the books before when I was a very young patrol officer. And it's now those laws have really helped me to write a better application to get that involuntary hospitalization, the application, and let the doctor make their decision.
Really appreciate you sharing all of that information, Dr. C. I'm wondering, based on what you said, and anyone can chime in on this, I would think that maybe something that family members can do to help that situation is to become more comfortable ourselves with law enforcement. You mentioned someone having a crisis, Carlos, isn't stupid. I think that's the word you use. Your loved one can pick up probably if you're a little hesitant. If you got to call 911 and a police officer shows up and you're uncomfortable with that officer, some of that's going to bleed over into the person in crisis, I would think. So maybe some of the work we can do, and we're going to talk a little bit about preparing for the crisis before you're in crisis. We'll talk about that before I let you guys get away from us. Maybe one of the things friends and family members can do, family members and caregivers can do, is become more comfortable with the cop that's loving on you, the cop that Ray just talked about, and getting very comfortable with law enforcement, making sure your children have interactions and they begin to see law enforcement as something that's non-threatening. And then that might make that crisis situation a little bit easier for everybody.
Yeah, Ray, before we kick it off to you, the couple of habitual calls that I went on, the family, they learned to trust me. And also the person in need learned to trust me, because once again, they know what's going on. They're not stupid, but they have two realities blending into one. It's chaotic. So yeah, Ray, please go ahead.
Yeah, Ray, please.
So it's real tough. It's really tough. And I can just talk about my experiences working inside the prison system when dealing with crisis. And we call them crisis beds. We have had certain institutions where we would house certain individuals that were in crisis. But again, we spoke to it. We turned to individuals who they were comfortable with. And once they saw that the individual that they were comfortable with were okay with other individuals, then that made them more comfortable with receiving care and treatment. So again, relationships, I think, is key to all of it, in forming relationships and just ensuring that we have a trusting relationship, because most people understand the job that you have to do and how difficult it is. They just want you to be fair about what you do.
Can I chime in?
Absolutely, Alondra.
I just want to say, when the county was looking into a problem like this, they made sure to bring in the community partners. We had 4 focus groups that consisted of family members, individuals with substance use or mental health issues, and they told us what they wanted. They told us how they want our team to be: open, with lived experience. That's why we have a peer with lived experience, and we have the clinicians. So when they call 988, there's a full conversation with the individual calling. What we've seen a lot of is the family members or a support person calling 988, explaining the situation. So when we do go out there, and if the person is initially not wanting to hear from us, we interact with the support person. We provide information that we would provide to the individual. And what has happened, each visit, that peer and the individual needing de-escalation is supported to the point where they're willing to listen to what service are offered them. We've actually transported voluntarily the individual to our mental health care center, and we've been able to provide service, reconnect them with the linkage they already have in the community. And it's been very good to have that initial feedback from the community and then being able to have a program created with their voice.
Alondra, I'm so glad you jumped in there, because you just began to touch on my next question. Can you continue with the point you said when someone calls 988? And I think at that point, not just because it's a new service, but for those of us who haven't yet been in a mental health crisis yet, that for the caller can be a little scary or a little intimidating. I know I wouldn't right off the top of my head know what to say, what to ask for, what do I communicate? So can you walk us through that first part of that conversation at least? If I call your service, if I call 911, I get one of your operators, what do I say? What are the first few things I need to communicate to get the conversation started?
So our call center is actually original, the suicide prevention warm line that converted into a 988. and also supports any crisis related to behavioral health services, both mental health and substance use. So when a person calls, they know they're calling to get support. And that crisis specialist on the call takes that information, doesn't ask questions, let the individual tell their story. And we listen and we address any danger, or if there's anything that we need to be aware of before sending out our team. So then we do a warm handoff to our community wellness response team dispatchers, who take on additional information if necessary. And then we send our teams out.
And in terms of time frame, how long does that conversation usually I want to call it an intake. I don't know if that's the proper term, but how long does that conversation last? You kind of chuckled, so I might not have the term right. But how long does that take, Alondra?
That phone conversation takes about 5 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, so not very long at all. Nothing someone needs to be so concerned about. And I think the important thing for me is to know that there's an expert on the other end of that line. So I might be in crisis, but it sounds like you guys know what you're doing and you know what you're dealing with, and you've probably seen and heard that very problem before. So we can feel a little more comfortable about making that call.
That's right.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about respite services. And I'm just wondering about if there's a relationship, if the two coexist, can mobile crisis also exist with getting someone into respite services? And maybe, Alondra, you were talking, so why don't you start, and then we can, maybe Dr. C, you can fill us in with some other thoughts if you have any. What do you think, Alondra?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So we have crisis stabilization units for up to 23 hours that we have access to. We also have contact with the 24/7 Mental Health Urgent Care Center here in Sacramento. That's 24/7. And so we have like a crisis continuum. Depending on the individual's needs, we have crisis beds, we have the crisis stabilization units that I spoke about, and we also have the Mental Health Treatment Center and access to the Mental Health Urgent Care Center, which is 24/7. Just wanted to say that again.
Really appreciate it. Dr. C, anything else you want to add to that about respite services?
Yeah, respite services are great, but what I've realized is that they're dependent on where you live, basically, right? Where I'm located in the state of California, as far as mental health, respite services aren't widely known. I do know of respite services for Alzheimer's, and I have responded to 911 radio calls for people who are in crisis, and it turns out that it's sundowners and it's Alzheimer's going on. But what I've learned, talk, network, ask for support. National Alliance on Mental Illness is huge in the nation and the state of California and in local area, wherever you're listening from. Each little chapter, though, is different. They depend on what's in the area. So you basically, to make a long story short, you have to ask them, see what's in your area. If it's not there, you know what, let's get some people together and let's figure out how do we get some respite services, because I'm at home, I'm dealing with someone who has severe and persistent mental illness. I need some time off. I need an hour or two just for myself, so I can love on them like Ray says, but I need a break for myself. So if it's not there, hey, let's see how we can build it.
Yeah, appreciate hearing that. And as I think about, you said check out resources that are there, find out what's in your community, Dr. Carlos. That all relates again to that another production we've got. I believe it's an audio podcast on assembling your mental health emergency toolkit. It's important that you ask all those questions up front before the crisis happens. And we've kind of walked you through the different things, just like you've got a physical health, first aid kit in your house. Hopefully you've got some antiseptic, you got some Band-Aids, a number to call. If you got little ones in the home, maybe on the side of the refrigerator, what the numbers are that they can call for a physical emergency. Think about a mental health emergency the same way. And the more thinking you can do ahead of time, the more effective you'll be when the crisis hits, and you'll have everything laid out for you. Let's talk a little bit about our youth. A lot of what we do with Brother Be Well is youth related. So Ray, as a mentor, I'm going to lean on you to kind of lead us in this one. What is happening with our youth right now? What kind of crises are they engaged in? Is any of it related to coming out of the COVID pandemic? We read a lot, not so much anymore, but we used to read a lot about, isolation and the break in education and all the stuff that young people were dealing with. So we are excited when someone like you that is in touch with youth all the time. Talk to us a little bit about our young people and what the challenges they're dealing with are. And then Dr. C, I'm going to bounce it to you as well as an associate marriage and family therapist. You probably got a perspective as well. But let's start out with you, Ray. What are our young people dealing with right now that parents and caregivers need to know about?
Parents and caregivers, unfortunately, are absent. And we have the youth raising themselves and trying to figure things out when they're not mentally ready or prepared. And there's actually a broadcast that's happening right now in the Sacramento area, Del Paso Heights, and it's called Cracked Out. Mm-hmm. And they're showing that the crack epidemic is a direct correlation of how the youth are living today, because they have missing parents, missing grandparents, and they're having to raise themselves. I'm working with a teen currently who is 13 years old, and his mother tells him that she needs him to figure out how to make money because he's expensive. And this is a 13-year-old kid. And so that's the message that I'm hearing from a lot of the students, that they're told by their parents, the ones that they trust, that they need to figure some things out when they're not mentally prepared or even have the knowledge to even know how to figure those things out, because they're relying on adults. And so we were in a meeting this past weekend with students at Health Professions High School here in Sacramento. And the one thing that the student says is the adults have let us down. The adults have let us down, and we don't know how we're going to continue because we don't know how to figure things out. They haven't lived that life yet, to understand what is going on. We're forcing them, like I said, they don't, and then I'm gonna just speak from a Black male, they don't see themselves as 20 years old. They just don't think that they're going to make it that far, whether it be through community violence, police brutality, or just drugs, or just being a victim of some type of violence. They just don't see themselves making it to 20. And it's a sad case, but the number one thing, again, Michael, I can say is they feel that adults have let them down.
You broke my heart twice there, Ray, with that statement about our having let our young people down. And you also touched quite a nerve. I was a young person that didn't think I was going to live to be 18 because of what was going on in my community and some of what was going on right in my house. So you took me all the way back to that sense of hopelessness. And you also touched on a point that I want to make. You talked about that 13-year-old not really being ready or capable of really moving through challenges. We've learned through our work at Brother Be Well, a 13-year-old doesn't have a brain yet that's even remotely fully developed. Young people's brains don't fully develop. For boys, it's even later than girls. So we're Brother Be Well. For boys, it's 27 or 28, I think, Dr. Carlos. So a 13-year-old literally, I'm not trying to make a joke, but that brain is only half baked. If it's 26 or 27, a 13-year-old is in no way ready to make to figure that out. Yeah. It's not the young person's fault. Dr. C, can you jump in here, chime in with what we just heard from Ray or your own perspective?
Yeah. Well,
about what you're dealing with?
Carlos, the person first. I mean, Ray, shoot, I'm going to sit here for a split second. I'm like sitting here going, okay, how was I as a dad today? How was I as a dad this weekend? Right? Seriously, that's real stuff. Because
It is.
I wear many hats. Did I spend 5 minutes just to talk to my kids today and see how they're doing, right? And sit here and say, no, you know what? You have a lot to worry about. You're only a kid, but you have a lot to worry about, right? And validate them. But that's important, right? Validating the kids, validating what they're dealing with. And Mike, you had mentioned brains developing. Yeah, generally speaking, our brains don't stop developing until our mid-20s. And if you think about mental health onset crisis, usually it's 13 years old up until maybe the mid-20s and stuff like that, right? So think of all the stuff that's going on there in that time frame, biologically, emotionally, physically, economically, socioeconomics. It's a lot of stress. And then to hear what Ray's talking about with all this, you got to go out there, you got to earn, you got to bring some stuff on the table. Let's bring some food, pay some bills.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah, please go ahead.
As I'm listening to this, my heart breaks too after Ray's story. I grew up, my mom was on crack from the age I was 8 on up. But what I did see in my community growing on that I don't see now, there were Black professions, like Black teachers that took me in and watched over me and made sure that I stayed on the right path. Because I could have gone just where these thoughts of these 13-year-olds are having to deal with now. And when I speak, I've been a therapist since 2003, so about 20 years. My community message is we need to get into the system where our babies are growing up. Schools, hospitals, doctors, doulas. We need to help our community. It takes a village is not a joke. And that's so true. I just had to say that, when we're thinking about this young 13-year-old brother, we need to put mentors around him like no other. And we need to show up for our kids because our parents just weren't baked the right way. They're going through things, they're doing their lives to the best of their knowledge and understanding. Because I say that for my mom, who's no longer with me because she never got out of this life. But I don't want us to let that little baby only think that his parents are the only ones there for him. He needs to know so we can build that resilience in him and the women, all kids, because I know how it was there for me that allowed me to be here today. I just had to put that out. Thank you for letting me share.
And I'm glad you shared, Alondra. You just reminded me of another point I wanted to make. We're Brother Be Well, and your being here today, Alondra, represents a broadening on my part. When we launched this platform 3 years ago, I was standing strong, and I was saying we need experts. The experts all have to be brothers. And then my boss put the little bug in my ear. She said, "Don't we want the best expert? Does it matter at the end of the day if the person with the knowledge is an Alondra Thompson who can school us about these mobile crisis units?" And then I think that he'll transform what we started doing at Brother Be Well. So I love what you said about mentors being there. I immediately thought of you, Ray, because I know you and I know the work that you do in the community. And I know a lot of your colleagues at the Hawk Institute. Talk a little bit about what Alondra said, Ray, about a community coming together. I came from that same community, Alondra, where my barber was a mentor. I mean, I talk about him. Thank you, Mr. Lampkin. He's gone on to be with the ancestors. But you walked in Mr. Lampkin's shop, and there was no profanity in that shop. You go to school looking a little raggedy if you broke his rules. He snatch you up in a minute and get you straight. And I do think we as a community, we've leaned away from that to a large extent. And as I say that, I know, Ray, that young person is right. We have let them down. So we got to get back with the program and do our part.
Yes.
Right. And what he wasn't understanding, what he was saying, he was basically saying, Alondra, community. He was basically saying the adults that he interact with, because, and that's one of the things that I share with him. I said, as long as I'm alive, you'd never have to go hungry. Your mom would never, ever have to worry about a meal for you.
Yes,
because I'll do whatever I can to make sure that you eat. But unfortunately, we don't have that community anymore, because I think we're all at that age where we were fortunate to have that type of community and environment, because I had a missing parent. I have a missing dad. So if it wasn't for the men in the community, Michael, that stepped up and took me to basketball or football practice, I wouldn't have been able to go. So I think that's where we have to get back to. I'm currently working with several nonprofit organizations in Sacramento, and I want to establish a map and basically saying, this is where you go for this service. This is where you go for this service. This is where you go see Brother Be Well when you need mental health services. You go here when you need this service, because what's happening is I don't think people know where to go.
Right.
They don't know. Just like, and honestly, the respite services, I hadn't heard of those. I hadn't heard of those, because maybe for one, that's not something that I need or have been familiar with, but we should all be familiar with the various services that are available to help the youth. And so if we can have a map to point youth or anyone in the right directions, I think that's one of the things that's needed. And I think that's the number one thing. That's how you form a community.
Yeah. Really important point, Ray, and let us know here at Brother Be Well how we can help you do that. I think that's a really valuable project, getting that map out there, that resource guide, and we'll commit to doing whatever we can to help you do that. We've got just a few more minutes here, guys. I told you that the time was going to fly by. We've got just a few more minutes together. Before I let you go, I want to talk with you, Alondra. I'll ask you to lead us in this. When we think about mobile crisis units, how do we, it's a fantastic service, I think, that a lot of people need to know about. What's the best way to go about communicating the existence of those services to the community? Ray just said, with regard to respite services, he didn't even know they were there. So how do we make sure everyone knows about mobile crisis units before that crisis hits?
Well, there's been a lot of marketing for 988. And the county has funded us to do a marketing just for the community wellness response team. So we're working on that now with our advisory committee for its community wellness response team. But just for our community, I think what we're doing with Edelman, is a contractor for our marketing, is making sure that the message makes sense to the population we're here to serve. Because we talk about mental health, but it's different for every community. So we are using focus groups. We're bringing in the community. We're asking, how do you say mental health? How do you say behavioral health services? How do you talk or say anything about substance use and dependence? And we want that wording to make sure it's made available to the community that can hear it.
Beautiful. Really beautiful. Ray, Dr. C, any other thoughts about that?
I would like to say we had a Brother Be Well session, Michael, and you'll probably remember that, when we talked about how mental health treatment was a privilege that a lot of people of color didn't have. And it really resonated with me, because I was going for a specific promotion within the Department of Corrections. And one of the things happened to someone, they ended up having to report that they had a mental health crisis before, and which now made them ineligible for that promotion. So now you have people afraid to even seek out help, because the fear of being stigmatized and or passed over for promotional opportunities and or let go, depending upon what type of field you are in. And I know that Dr. Carlos can speak to that as well. If you have a certain type of mental health crisis, you're not going to be eligible to work in certain areas.
Dr. C?
Yeah. I mean, I don't do the hiring. I'm not in charge of personnel hiring, but we know to be a police officer, we've got to go through a battery of tests, and it's okay to have a little bit of stuff going on, but if you have some severe and persistent things, that your career, your dream's not going to happen.
That's right.
Yeah. Really appreciate you guys sharing perspectives on that, getting the information out there. Alondra, I think your words, speaking in a language that people speak. That's how I translated what you said, and getting the information out there. We got just a few more minutes, so I want to leave some closing thoughts. I'll throw it to the three of you. Alondra, maybe you first. What are your closing thoughts about mobile crisis? And anybody watching this video, if you could share one or two takeaways, what do you want people to take away from them from this conversation?
When you're dealing with a behavioral health services crisis, be it mental health and or substance use, please call 988.
Love it. And it's easy to remember. As I said, we had a conversation. I remember the old number. I don't even want to give it out, Alondra. It was a really long number, right? It's hard to remember. And one of the things I like about 988 is just like 911. If I cut my hand right now, there's no stigma attached to calling 911. I am bleeding. I can't stop the bleeding. What do? The same is true of a mental health crisis. So 988 is the number. Even if you're not really sure it's a mental health crisis, if you think it is, call 988.
Yes.
Love it. Love it. Love it. How about you, Ray? What's your takeaway for folks watching this video?
The takeaway is mental health. A mental health crisis is not a bad thing. It's an opportunity to receive help and look at it that way. And again, just work to trust the community advocates within your community, and that's to include law enforcement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. Thank you, Ray. How about you, Dr. Carlos Martinez? Bring it home.
Yeah. For the person who's in crisis, if you're listening, right, just remember that if you reach out for help, that's not a sign that you're weak. It's a sign that you're strong. It takes courage to sit here and say, help me. I need help. And for the family listening, patience, support. It's going to be a journey. We're all here to support you. Just reach out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carlos Martinez, Associate Marriage and Family Therapist with HearYou.org, Ray Harrington, Hawk Institute Mentor, and Alondra Thompson. Yours is I want to make sure I get it right, Alondra, Health Program Manager with Sacramento County. Thank you, guys. Again, we couldn't have this conversation without you, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to thank our sponsor once again, Blue Shield of California, and specifically their BlueSky initiative. They made this conversation possible and a lot of our trauma and healing series here at Brother Be Well, videos and audio podcasts as well. Thank you to Blue Shield of California's BlueSky initiative. That website is bluesky.blueshieldca.com. That's bluesky.blueshieldca.com. Check them out. I'll give you another quick website. That's our own. We've been talking about it a little bit here today, brotherbewell.com. Brother Be Well is an organization, if you haven't figured it out, that's concerned about promoting and healing in the people of color communities, behavioral health for boys and men of color, 13 and up, African American, Asian and Pacific Islander, Native and Indigenous, and the LGBTQIA plus communities that inform and enhance all of those cultural communities, Asians, Native Americans, Latinx, and the African American community. All of that information is available at brotherbewell.com. We are a membership supported service, and memberships are free. So you can join right now at brotherbewell.com. When you join, do one more thing. Leave us your email address and sign up for our blog. And that way, once you sign up for the blog, when conversations like this one go live, you'll be among the first to hear about it. So take care of all of that, if you would, at brotherbewell.com. My name again, Michael P. Coleman. I'm content director for Brother Be Well. It's a great honor of mine to serve in that capacity for you. I want to ask you before we go and between now and the time we get to talk again, do two quick things for me, if you would. Take great care of yourself. That's the hard one sometimes, and we're trying to help you with it. The easy one, do something good to take care of somebody else. Until next time, bye-bye.